Hello, everybody, and welcome again to another episode of Complete Crock. I'm your host, King Crocoduck, with my two co-hosts, Zarathustra's Serpent and the Academic Agent. Today we're going to be talking about mass murder. This is shortly after the Las Vegas shooting, so a bit of a timely discussion. We're going to be talking also about people's reactions to it and maybe some lack of consistency thereof. But why don't we begin with probably a useful distinction to turn this not just a Mara-centric issue, but it's an international issue as well. It might be useful to start by distinguishing a lone wolf from a mass or from a terrorist.
All right. Well, I mean, the agenda is different. I think that it's basically the results are basically the same if someone goes on a shooting spree, but they have a different agenda, and that's the difference. And I think that makes actually the murder, the lone wolf, more dangerous because you can't see them coming. While the terrorists, you can, I mean, here in Israel, most terrorists plots are thwarted. Of them. So
Yeah, well,
that's the difference, basically.
I guess it's complicated somewhat by the fact that there has been a rise of the lone wolf terrorist, where
are we talking about lone wolf terrorist or lone wolf murderer?
because he's talking about kind of a lone wolf mass killing in this way without any obvious political agenda. Yeah. But I mean, I guess what I'm saying is that the distinction has become more fraught or blurred or complicated by the fact that you now have this trend of essentially lone nutters doing things and then claiming it for, ISIS or some other terrorist organization. If you look at a lot of the attacks in France or across Europe in the past 2 years, a lot of them have had this pattern of being seemingly random acts of violence, which are then claimed, which is why it was, semi-farcical when ISIS tried to claim this one. I guess we can talk about that because it's still, in this case, nobody really believed them. Whereas in all the other cases, it seemed like there was an obvious connection, or the police found a connection. So I guess that's one of the reasons why this has become less obvious now than it would have been, I don't know, like 5 years ago, say, where a lot of the terrorism was more highly organized or connected to networks of terrorist organizations. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think it's become kind of trendy to claim that you belong to ISIS for some people. So maybe that's what I think that's what's causing it, because terrorists terrorist attacks come in waves, and we know here that when the ball starts rolling with terrorist attacks, you will get more because people get inspired. And what you're saying is that they are not even terrorists; they're just claiming after the fact, and I guess it's part of it. It's part of the fact that it's trendy, so they want to make it into something ideological, be more respected or whatever.
It's interesting. It's an interesting distinction. I haven't really thought of it like that. Yeah, that's good, I guess. Typically, the distinction, as we noted, is between political motives versus just personal, going postal, running amok, as they used to say. But it seems now that people who would have run amok otherwise now can sort of, throw their chips in with a terrorist organization and say, "Oh yeah, I'm doing it because of this." I wonder though, do we have any reason not to believe them?
Well, it depends. I think that they are affected on, like I said, it's a trend, so they are probably affected on some level. I mean, this guy in Las Vegas wasn't a Muslim, and so I see no reason to believe that he had anything to do with that. But if when that Muslim went and shot the gay bar in Florida, where was it? And then there was a question whether he belonged to ISIS or not. I think he was probably affected by ISIS on some, even if he didn't belong to them.
Yeah, I mean, I guess before you had these two very distinct categories, didn't you? Where I'm talking about, say, the difference between Columbine, which is a famous case, and say 9/11, to obviously different orders of, obviously both terrible events. One of them was done by somebody who's psychotic and doesn't have any obvious motive. You'd call that, that's your old-fashioned kind of lone wolf killing, and the other one could only have been carried out by a network of, highly connected, politically motivated terrorists. But if you have a look at the past 2 or 3 years, like I said, you've got, I mean, they do tend to call out things like, Allah Akbar and things in the moments just before they do them. But
Muslims will do that always.
but what I'm saying is that it's more like, somebody makes a bomb in their garage, or somebody decides to steer a lorry into a crowd of people. These are much more kind of random acts of violence, which, yes, they were politically motivated, but the method is very different, which is why in this particular case, they thought that they could claim that, even though it seems like there's very little connection in this particular case. For me, the most interesting thing about this was the way the various sides have reacted, because there's no known motive. This was almost immediately politicized by all concerned, and I just thought it was an interesting kind of litmus test to see where the various sides were. I mean, I can summarize them briefly if you want. So that
Sure.
I guess the far left, or the fringy, more nuttery left, immediately made this about some of them were almost celebratory when it wasn't, when it's transpired to be a white man and not, not a Muslim terrorist. There was an oddly triumphant tone about that, which I found distasteful. Some of them were almost celebratory of the fact that they were almost exclusively kind of, the people who he killed were kind of white country fans, and therefore much more likely to be Trump supporters. That in itself was an odd thing. There was the kind of the BLM, like I saw the tweet by Sean King. I don't know if you saw that, where he said, like, the fact that the gunman is white will disproportionately mean that they'll torpedo this story into being just a lone wolf who had psychological issues. As if the way it's reported is different because of the color of the person who did the shooting. So that was kind of the far left or fringe left type reaction. Then you had, I guess, the establishment Democrat reaction, summed up by Hillary Clinton and various other people who immediately made this about gun control, and wanted to hammer home the point that this wouldn't have happened if gun control was a thing in America. And that's where a lot of the podcasts and news organizations that I follow went with the story ultimately. And, pretty much straight down the line, Fox News immediately made it about why owning a gun is fine, and your left-leaning organizations immediately pointed to this as if it was a no-brainer. So that's what happened there, and then the right seemed to. I mean, the further right you got, the more immediately this went into conspiracy theory territory. Basically, do you think that's fair? Because there was not a known motive, and because there are a lot of unusual things, you immediately got a splintering of,
Yeah, I saw some of it.
What was it? ISIS? Was it? Is this? Was this a government? Government cover-up of an Antifa or a far leftist type person doing a politically motivated crime, and they're not telling us. In one case, there's this thing going around that this guy is still alive. So those are all the different reactions that I saw. Did I miss any out? Did you guys see any others type of reactions that I didn't cover?
That about sums up kind of all the reactions that happen every time. It's a good summary. The only thing that's missing is the trolls making the video games and the online message boards where you like play as the shooter. I'm sure those will come out relatively soon.
I don't see how this helps the left that you talked about, because this is not white terrorism. They are usually happy about white terrorism when it shows that whites are the real problems, and you shouldn't make it about Muslims. But this was not terrorism. So this was a mass shooting like happens in America a lot. A lot. So
I don't really know what their point is, though. Like, let's say, okay, all right, fine. It wasn't Islamic terrorism on this occasion, but like, what difference does it make? I mean, we've had so many different attacks now that, like, what I don't know. I just don't understand the triumphant tone when it turned out not to be that.
In America specifically, mass shootings significantly outnumber terror attacks, whereas in other parts of the world, that's not necessarily the case. That may be, that may be where this kind of myopic feeling of triumphalism comes from.
No, I think the point is that they're claiming that anybody who is they're trying to prove Islamophobia. So they're saying, look, they're always saying that actually there are more white terrorists killing than Muslim terrorists, and of course they're focusing only on America, disregarding what's going on all over the world with the Muslims, which America is getting very little of because they don't have a lot of Muslims, But this is, I think, the point. The point is to say you are Islamophobes because actually it's more white people doing terrorist attacks, and you are making it about that the Muslims are terrorists. This is what I see. This is what the Young Turks are doing, for instance, or I've seen others doing the same.
It's very. Why would they want to cover for or try to protect Muslim terrorists? I don't understand.
Not Muslim terrorists, Muslims.
Just just normal, the so-called moderate Muslim, I suppose.
Yeah. The claim is, that Muslims are not worse than anyone else. Bad Muslims, like you have some bad Christians and bad Jews, and the same thing, and I think we should be making. I mean, there are some, right wingers who are saying that Islam is this transcendent evil. The claim I'm making is that Islam at the moment has a problem, which makes it a lot more violent than other groups. There have been times in history. I mean, you go back to the 1940s, and it was European culture who had the problem and was killing in the millions. Yeah. So it's the Muslims who have the problem. They are, as Sam Harris once said, at this moment they are Islam is the motherlode of bad ideas. And he was right about it when he said that, and it's important he said at this moment, because I think we need to make that distinction, because this whole argument about which is worse overall throughout history is not constructive. At this moment, Islam has a problem, and it needs to now. When you go to solve this problem, then you actually have to look at the entire history of Islam and see criticize it basically, and see what you can do to make it better. But the focus should be on this one.
Well, I've just finished reading this book, and I think I'll probably make a video, a book review video for Douglas Murray's Strange Death of Europe. But a huge amount of this book is devoted to seeing the various ways in which any criticism of Islam has been dealt with in Europe over the past 20, 30, 40 years, but especially in the past 20 or 30 years. And he raises some really interesting points in that. Like, for example, he says that people really underestimate the impact of the critique of Christianity in the 1890s, which really, I mean, was really shot across the bows. We had, okay, there are some kinks in the history of Christianity with the Reformation and so on and so forth, but more or less there's a kind of stable truth for about 1800, almost 2000 years in Europe. And then when the German philosophers, especially in the 1880s and the 1890s, start to pull apart, critique, and expose the contradictions in the Bible, it makes it, and then you get Darwin, and then you get
I think you mean 1780s, no? You said 1880s.
Yeah, well, yeah, he is talking specifically actually about Bible scholarship, where so yes, you get the Enlightenment, and you get the rise of science and those things, but he reckons that the real shift happened when you start getting this kind of nitty-gritty Bible
and that's end of 19th century.
And it happens to coincide with Darwin's ideas becoming more accepted, and he points out that Islam has not had this moment. It has not been possible, even within so-called moderate circles, to criticize the Quran or to do that kind of close scholarship. Even people in universities and things face heavy threatening pressure if they want to do that sort of, I guess, deconstruction or historical, and obviously the Quran, just like the Bible, is full of contradictions, full of, as with any text, you're going to find those things, but it hasn't been allowed to happen. And essentially the way any sort of criticism has been dealt with since the time that Salman Rushdie was given the fatwa by the Ayatollah has been to they've shut it down with violence, and essentially people are cowed. I'm sure you all remember the Charlie Hebdo stuff. Think of the shift of tone. Like, when was the last time you saw someone on TV even dare to mention Islam? And that's how, I mean, that's kind of terrorism working, right?
I actually think it happens more now than before Charlie Hebdo. I mean, certainly on YouTube, but I think people are beginning to talk, actually. Before that, they didn't talk.
Right.
I mean, in Israel, we were saying that they need to wake up. Something, by the way, that is relevant to something we said before. I remember and that was decades ago when I was a child. There was an attack by one Muslim attacked Jews in America. I think it was in an airport, and Israel was very angry that the Americans wouldn't define this as a terrorist attack. It was an Arab Palestinian thing, and why? Because it didn't belong to any terrorist group. But here, you know, when a Palestinian attacks Jews, it's terrorism, and it is terrorism. And I think now I think the Americans will define that as terrorism as well. But back then, you know, it didn't belong to a terrorist group, so it wasn't a terrorist. That's I mean, that was at least initially. I remember what they were saying. And yeah, but I think I think there is more people talking more right now. Douglas Murray is talking. Yeah.
Well, you're right. Yes. But I guess what he's saying, I mean, part of his overall thesis is that basically at the moment that European culture has lost the nerve to stand up for itself, you know, Islam is the kind of uncowed, unapologetic, and basically since we've experienced the loss of religion and nothing has really replaced it, our kind of secular materialist culture doesn't have, how can I put this? It doesn't have, materialism doesn't give people enough to cling on to. It doesn't give enough of a sense of purpose for life, which is why one of the reasons why Islam is kind of getting away with the things that it is and actually growing even in the face of its atrocities. So that's part, I mean, it's kind of in many ways a pessimistic book, but he's saying that unless something changes this directory, unless this direction is changed and Europeans find some new thing to cling on to, and I think the SJW is a part of this as well, because in a way that diversity cult is trying to fill that void. It is trying to replace the massive gap that is left by religion. And I mean, I don't know. I don't have any answers, and I guess Crock may have some thoughts on this as I guess a more vehement atheist than I am. How do you deal with this problem where we used to have religion at the heart of our culture, and it's the ultimate root of so many of the values that we have in the West, but now it's kind of missing. It's missing, and we don't really have that. So how do you stand up to something, you know, what Nietzsche would call a master morality like Islam, when you don't have a counter narrative to go with? You don't have a set of positive values to put in its place.
Well, I was kind of hoping.
Yeah.
I was kind of hoping that scientism and the philosophies which sustain it would kind of take the place of religion, and you would have a society that's singularly dedicated to, basically, to scientific progress. And a part of this would be materialistic, but it would also be expansionistic in a sense. I don't know if that makes much sense, but it would basically be Karl Popper's vision of the open society, and the conditions which are necessary to sustain scientific growth, and everybody would be part of this process. That was sort of my.
I think that is strong enough, and I think again, I think we are seeing people are waking up, and are do want to protect this, do want to protect the free society. It takes time to steer the ship around, you know. But I think, I mean, I see things that I haven't seen before. I see, you know, Sweden suddenly saying that we are going to minimize the number of, we are not going to take more immigrants, and all. there's the beginning, and of course all these right-wing politicians popping up, and so there is this groundswelling of people beginning to say we need to change something.
Well,
and I think that there's still time for change. There's still time.
One of the things he does, though, is that he does look at the alternative visions. One of them is the progressive vision that Crock talked about, the scientific progress, and the other one is the Wagner, the Wagnerian vision that art and culture are somehow going to take the place of religion, which I think is closer to your vision, Zarathustra, right? That it's going to come from culture, and he basically says that both of these things were shown to fail by the atrocities of the Second World War, and essentially Europe has not recovered from that moment because but basically the kind of the progressive self-narrative now is so self-deprecating. It's almost like there's an original sin, a guilt at the heart of what people tell themselves, and this is bound up with the social justice warriors, of course. But it's more difficult to be proud of history and culture and even of scientific progress when it's led to these things. So somehow we almost owe it to the world to just open up and let people come in and have unlimited migration. And I mean, one of the things that struck me was the amount of people from across Europe. Like, I hadn't heard these quotations before, but you mentioned Sweden, like the Prime Minister of Sweden saying things like there's no such thing as Swedish culture, or Swedish culture is only barbarism, and things like that. It's because so actively kind of denying your own identity, your own culture, your own history, while championing outside cultures and peoples. This is a very, very weird mindset.
Yeah, it is weird.
And I mean, maybe it is turning around. The very fact he wrote the book is part of it, but I wonder how much it's turning around. And I wonder if nothing, if can culture or science alone, without something to replace religion, do it? It's one of those. I don't have any answers, but it's something I've been thinking about. I'm guessing the exchange that you had with the distributist is part of this, right? I haven't managed to watch it yet, but
yeah. Well, I'm in my latest video. I mean, my latest video is kind of tongue-in-cheek in a way, but I'm once again, eulogizing pop culture, and the distributist thinks that when I'm talking about pop culture, I'm talking about basically a mindless consumption, he calls it. Where when I call about, for me, popular culture is the thing that is the driving force of Western culture, and has always been. Yes, Shakespeare was popular culture, and Mozart was popular culture, and so this is what when I talk about popular culture, I talk about that, and what we call high culture is just things that were popular culture once, but were the things that remained after all the consumption, the mediocre stuff went away. They remained and became high culture. The thing that basically is the basis of the European culture, basically, okay, so this is between me and the distributist, and I'll answer him tomorrow in a comment. Yeah, but I'm more optimistic, just because I do see he again. The distributor says, what makes you be so optimistic after what we've seen in the last 20 years? And I'm saying, why are you looking only at the last 20 years? Why not at the last 200 years, where we're seeing liberty and enlightenment and all that spreading throughout the world? And this is what I believe in. Yes, I believe that ultimately these ideals of ultimately people want freedom. They don't really know. I mean, sometimes they don't know how to achieve it because of their culture. That they need time. You need time to learn to think how like a free individual. This is what I was saying to the neocons, 15 or 10 years ago. You are thinking of the Iraqis. You're going into Iraq. The neocons basically, and also the SJWs, think that they don't bring into account the changes in culture, the differences in culture. They think that you just need to change the environment, and people will. If you take the Iraqi or the Syrian out of the environment where he's under dictatorship, and put him in a democratic environment, then he will become democratic. It doesn't happen that way. He doesn't think like a free person. It takes time, but it is possible. In Israel, okay, Israel is the country that after the World War II has taken in the largest amount of immigrants compared to its population, more than any other country in the world. There may be a few islands on the exception, but Israel is taken in, and most of these immigrants came from countries that had no democratic tradition. They came from the Arab countries and from former Soviet Union and from Ethiopia and places like that. And it takes time. It takes a couple of generations, but they integrate. The first generation, the immigrants that come find it hard. For the children, it's already easier, and they make it easier for the parents. And the grandchildren are already completely within the democratic mindset.
But is that because Israel is unapologetically Jewish and is not ashamed of that, and is just, happy? How can I put this?
Yes,
it's just it's unapologetic about its own culture in a way that is just not true in Europe. And
yes,
increasingly in America, there's a massive split between people who are and people who are not.
Yes, and that's what I'm saying. I made a video on the alt-right. I've made a few videos about this. I'm saying you're crazy. Well, of course, you need to have the national culture, and all the other cultures have to integrate into it and to find their own identity. Yes, keep your own identity, but also if you're Jew in America, be Jewish American. Yes, so be an American. And maintain some of your Jewish and find a way to integrate it. And the Jews have integrated into America. Yes, there's no problem for a Jew now to call himself an American if he lives in America. And you have to demand it from anybody who comes in, and be tough.
Part of Murray's argument is that they're shipping people in from sub-Saharan Africa, from Syria, from places that have basically nothing to do with Italy or Greece or Germany or any of these places that they end up in. And so even if you had a really we don't, but even if you had a really strong sense of national identity, because these people are so different and because their values are so different, it's more likely that they will end up changing the culture than the culture changing them.
It depends how many you bring in. It depends. Well, it depends how many you bring in.
Let's say a million people.
Yeah, no. If you bring them in moderation, then by the second generation they will be integrated.
I read that like 50% of people in Malmo come from elsewhere. I thought that was some incredible statistics in there. In fact,
Malmo is notorious.
London actually is majority non-white these days, which is again even from the point of view of the 1960s, where everybody called Enoch Powell and so on a racist for But if you had told somebody in 1965 that the capital of the United Kingdom would be majority non-white by the year 2017, they would have said that you were insane. But that is literally the case now. I mean, do you see this as a good thing? I mean, I've obviously made lots of videos. I've made a number of videos against white nationalism, but
there is civic nationalism, where you for civic nationalism to work, you have to be tough, and you have to bring in, and one of the things is that you have to bring in immigrants in moderation. You have to see what in Israel we are very aware of it. Israel is not about only Jews, but there is nobody, even not the extreme right, who wants and only Jewish, that only Jews can live in the country. But everybody, there's a consensus, left and right. We talk about a solid Jewish majority. That's the only way to survive. So a solid Jewish majority. That's everybody agrees on that, and I think it's so obvious for a Jew that for an Israeli that it's amazing that to see Europeans think differently. This is something that I made a video about nationalism about a year ago, and I didn't even realize that I'm arguing for civic nationalism, because to me it's so. I didn't realize that I'm a civic nationalist, because in Israel it's not even anyone who isn't, anyone who thinks that you shouldn't have the national culture Jewish is considered the part of the loony left. It's not considered a position that any reasonable person would have.
So Crock, one of the things I would have thought, at least traditionally, is that America as a place with a strong sense of civic nationalism, but I think we're seeing this eroded in the past couple of years, or even in the present moment.
Yes, I think the post-colonialists are to blame largely. I mean, today is Columbus Day, and on campuses all over the country, snowflakes out protesting, saying Columbus was a mass murderer. This holiday celebrates genocide. Blah 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 blah. Little things like that accumulate into this this culture of discontent.
Did you happen to see South Park a couple of weeks ago? Because it's almost like they called it ahead of time. Because the whole episode was about renaming Columbus Day, and it's almost like real life imitating art.
It happens every year. So
it's going on for a while.
But it becomes more and more popular each year as more and more people become woke. I'm interested in the SJW strategy in undermining Islam, because even though it doesn't seem like it, I have the lurking suspicion that they are trying to infiltrate Islam as an institution, but doing so in a kind of subversive manner that doesn't give away that. They like to commence the long march through the institutions. Science is a horrible institution that needs to be redeemed. The media is an institution that needs to be redeemed. They got that one a long time ago. Education, all of these things are institutions they have to infiltrate and set the agenda for. And it seems to me that they're trying to do the same thing with Islam. They're trying to get SJW Muslims to sort of become the new norm, if that makes any sense.
Look, the Muslim reformers, a lot of them are SJWs. At least when they talk about the West, they identify with the SJWs on many issues, even though they oppose them in when they defend Islam.
They both hate the West, so what do you expect? Of course, they're going to find common ground.
It's the kind of Muslim reformers they have their own state of mind, which you wouldn't see, like I said, I want to see, someone like Sarah Haider talking to Sargon of Akkad, which doesn't happen right now. I did see Majid Nawaz go and talk to Sargon, but there's this disconnect in the way they think and the way we think. I mean, to me, it's hard to talk to them, and I don't want them to be seen to be talking to an Israeli.
I mean, do you think this is something that could be won through the battle of ideas and debate? Because it seems to me there's only one language, ultimately, that I can understand. I hate to sound all doom-mongery, but I just don't see it. I think Nietzsche was basically correct when he talked about the master and slave morality, and we're seeing the master morality in, we see it. They are unapologetically pursue that. I mean, even if you look at the comments from so-called moderates, they're not that moderate if you listen and read to what they say. So I don't know. I think the entire strategy on this needs to be radically rethought by everybody.
You asked me about if the victory can only be achieved through ideas. But this is going to take a long time, and until then, you need to hold the gun as well and defend yourself. I mean, this is so you can't win the argument with guns. You're not going to force 1.5 billion people to.
But I mean, can you really win the battle of ideas with people who, believe the Quran? I mean, how do you win that? How do you win that particular battle of ideas? Like, you're dealing with somebody who's.
There's one in the West.
Yeah, why can't we do the same thing?
It takes time.
Why can't we win the culture war against Islam the same way we won the culture war against Christianity?
And well, I think it comes down to this master-slave morality thing, where the Christianity had a long history of basically being, various different philosophers in history picked up on it. Nietzsche, most famously, Machiavelli also. Christianity is all about turning the other cheek and kind of being quite submissive, whereas Islam's foundation is a lot more aggressive than that, and it always has been. It always has been. Even Muhammad himself was a conqueror. He led an army. Jesus didn't leave an army, and this is like just a fun. This is one of the things that people need to, I guess, be more open about, which is that not all religions are equal. Like they don't all preach the same thing. There are similarities, but this whole narrative of like the religion of peace and so on is something that, I mean,
that's nonsense. That's Muslims don't say that.
No, they don't say it, but like Western politicians say it whenever there's an incident. So anyway,
look, it actually made sense when Bush said it. The approach was, and it continued with Obama, and I agree to it to some extent. The approach was, you're trying to get moderate Muslims to be on your side against the terrorists, while at the same time allowing voices, reformist voices, liberal voices in the Muslim world to arise, because there weren't any, and so it made sense to say, oh, we are with you, with the moderate Muslims, for a while, at that time. After the Arab Spring, though, it opened up the sphere in which you now see actually ex-Muslims. You're seeing Muslims with who want to have democracy. So now I'm against being this appeasing towards the Arab dictators and all that, and being more aggressive towards Islam. Back then, if you are aggressive towards Islam, the entire Muslim world would have gone with the jihadists. Right now, you can't be aggressive towards Islam, and a lot of Muslims will still accept it.
I feel. I mean, I hate to say this, but when I look at history, the only thing that has really resorted world orders at different times in history have been great wars. And I mean, it's like, yes, there is the development of ideas, but eventually it leads to armed conflict, and then things kind of shake out after that. Take World War II, for example. People underestimate the extent to which that kind of completely realigned the world, realigned the demographic makeup of European countries. It in a sense, it's kind of tricky ground here, but in a sense, the fascists kind of sorted people back into their ethnic groupings. Like things were a lot more, things were actually a lot more multicultural before the fascists were there, and they kind of sorted people back out into their nations of origin. There's a really interesting book about this called Post-War. I forget the name of the historian now, but he talks about like the complicity of places like France in the post-war effort of essentially just sending people back to where they came from in the first place. And I feel like we may be heading towards like another moment where this kind of global reordering of things needs to happen, and it's difficult for it to happen without travesty, unfortunately. So
it's yes, but war would not lead to peace after the war if the cultures are not ready to accept the new ideas. The German culture was ready to accept democracy. It already had democracy, and so after the Nazis were defeated, Germans could go back to democracy. If you don't have the basis for democracy, so even if you defeat the regime, you are not going to get this. So you're going to get another war after that. That's what I'm saying. The war will not solve the problem. War is the thing that you have to do sometimes to protect the free world, but you're not going to make another society free through the barrel of a gun. It has to, that society, the culture of that society has to develop ideas which will make it a peaceful and democratic society.
Yeah. Did you guys, before we wrap up, do you guys want to talk about gun control at all? We were meant to be talking about Las Vegas, but we spent the whole time talking about Muslims.
Guns, yeah.
Well, one thing that I noted that was interesting was that Israel, I visited Israel once, and there are guns everywhere. Like you would get on a bus, and you look outside the bus, and you see like a 20-year-old girl, and she's holding a cell phone in one hand and texting or doing girl things on it, and in the other hand she has this fucking assault rifle M16. It's the strangest thing. Everybody holds a gun and nobody is shooting, like they do here in America.
First of all, not everybody is holding a gun. That girl that you saw was also wearing uniform, right? So
possibly.
Not possibly. You will not get away with going out with an M16 if you're not wearing uniform, army uniform. Okay, in Israel, look, a lot of guns, but basically civilians are not carrying guns in Israel. The ones who are carrying guns in civilian clothes are either army officers. Some of them carry handguns, and army officers are usually people who are stable, and intelligent. So not the kind of people who will go around shooting people, usually, or murdering. security guards. We have security guards everywhere. In the entrance of every public building, of every every school, in every entrance of every school, in every entrance of every central bus station, central stations, train station, every mall, you have armed guards. Now they are professionals. They get training, and as part of the training, it's also you do a background check on them, and you see that they are people who won't go out on a shooting spree. Another thing, everybody goes to the army, and gun safety rules get drilled into you. I mean, when they gave me an M16, it took time until they gave me bullets. First of all, you have to learn gun safety rules, and they drill it into you, and I still remember it. So you know how to handle guns in a safe way, and this is perhaps a thing that Americans should consider. So all of this, because of all of this, you don't really get crazy people with guns. Now, there is violence here because there's a larger number of guns, but it's not considered a problem here. But not gun. I mean, the murder rate in Israel is about twice what it is in Western Europe, and about half what it is in America. So it's not that it's not a high murder rate, and even if you add the terrorism, it's still lower than America. So this is, I always laugh. When the last war in Gaza, or before that, when they were shooting rockets, a friend of mine from America emailed me and asked me if I was okay, and I was like, "Are you kidding me? You live in Philadelphia, and you're asking me if I'm okay?" And I live, in Tel Aviv, where we get like one rocket a day during the war. And there is no cases of mass shootings in Israel except for the terrorists. Because of there's a lot of security guards around, there will be also people who will shoot a mass shooter. Yeah, someone who will go on a shooting spree.
I mean, one of the things I wonder about in the case of Israel, though, is that how can I put this? When you're in a kind of siege mentality, because there's obviously two different sides there, would that lessen the tendency for there to be Israeli on Israeli violence? Because do you know what I mean? Like because
well, first of all, definitely yes, and even before that, I mean, Jews feel a strong bond with each other, and for a Jew to kill a Jew is for political reasons. That's that's considered something that just isn't done. And yes, and of course, when you have when you're in a war, you feel a strong bond to each other. And actually, I talked before about Israel's success in integrating. Part of it is because everybody goes to the army and they integrate with each other in the army. So all of those things kind of Israel found a way to make all of these things work together. And yes, so yeah, okay. Those are I mean that's another reason. That definitely, and it comes from the strong bond that Jews have to each other, which is strengthened by the fact that we are in a perpetual war.
Well, Crock, you asked me what Thomas Sowell's take on this was. I noted down a few things here. I mean, he generally takes the standard Republican line, which is essentially that the cause of these problems is not the fact that people own guns. It is the fact that traditional communities have been steadily eroded by Democrat policies, essentially, which is why you get the highest crime and murder rates in Democrat-dominated areas. You mentioned Philadelphia. They'd also point to Detroit, to Chicago, LA.
Baltimore.
Baltimore. Like these are these are places that have been run by the Democrats for generations at this point, and it all goes back to the breakdown of the family in the 60s and the rise of the and I mean I have some sympathies with this argument, because you see a steep rise in crime basically everywhere or in the UK, in various countries around Europe, at the same time as all of these places developed a welfare state after 1945. You see a sharp uptick in crime basically everywhere. I don't know whether it's because I had a very long argument with a friend about this, whether it's welfare or whether it's the completely untested criminal rehabilitation rules that were brought in the 60s, basically everywhere, where it was more common for liberal lawyers and law groups to think about the criminal rights or the criminals, the criminal's point of view, as opposed to just straight up crime and punishment. And this is an argument they've had for many years. But I did note down some quotes from him, which I thought I'd got 6 of them. So I thought I'd read them out and see how you guys react. Okay. He says in 1911, New York State instituted one of the most severe gun control laws in the United States, while serious gun control laws did not begin in England until nearly a decade later. But New York City still continued to have far higher murder rates than London during the decade of 1910 to 1920. Second one, the 1688 Bill of Rights gave everyone in England the right to bear arms. Over a period of 3 years near the end of the 19th century, there were only 59 fatalities from handguns in a population of nearly 30 million people, according to Professor Malcolm. Of these, 19 were accidents and 35 were suicides, and only 3 of them were homicides, an average of 1 a year. So there you go. Everybody in England had the right to bear arms at that point, and there were literally 3 homicides in a population of 30 million people. After gun control laws were passed in the 20th century, the murder rate and the gun-related crimes increased by many times. For example, in 1954, there were only a dozen armed robberies in London, but by the 1990s, there were more than 100 times as many. In England, as in the United States, drastic crackdowns on gun ownership by law-abiding citizens were accompanied by ever greater leniency to criminals. In both countries, this turned out to be a formula for disaster and higher crime rates. And I actually think that if you look at the root causes for these things in England, certainly, I think it goes back to some of the things we were talking about before. The population of say 1945 to 1955 were very kind of not just law-abiding, but people would typically go to church, and it was just a very different time. And over the period of 50 years, you relax those things and you erode trust in the police and all of these sorts of things. And of course, you're going to get a less law-abiding, more crime-ridden country.
But there's no good there's no good reason to believe, though, that having more religion will make a person less likely to commit crime. In America, it's the other way around. Our prisons are basically completely filled with religious people, and atheists. They're overrepresented mainly on the Nobel Prize list and the Academy.
I get the sense that a lot of this is to do with the whip. How can I put this? Not only attitudes towards the police, but the way that crime was dealt with then, and the way that crime has been increasingly dealt with since they passed.
I think
everywhere, basically.
I think it's hard to point out to one thing. I think in America there's a gun culture problem. People are, they just love the guns and all that, and I think some just I think it's part of it. Passing stricter gun control laws is not enough. You need to change the mentality of the and like you see all these. I mean, it's black people, yes. So you see all those videos of blacks being shot by cops. Now when the policemen approach them, they have attitude. They treat the police as if they are the enemy, and this leads to a problem, and this leads to confrontation, and when they also have guns, well, this leads to killing. The police are on edge because a lot of them get shot.
Let's keep on going with these points, but he does address this in a second. He says, gun control zealots compare the United States and England to show that murder rates are lower where restrictions on ownership of firearms are more severe. But you could just as easily compare Switzerland and Germany. The Swiss have lower murder rates than the Germans, even though gun ownership is 3 times higher in Switzerland. Other countries with high rates of gun ownership and low murder rates include Israel, New Zealand, and Finland. Within the United States, rural areas have higher rates of gun ownership and lower rates of murder. Whites have higher rates of gun ownership than blacks, but much lower murder rates. For the country as a whole, gun ownership doubled in the late 20th century, while the murder rate went down. But such facts are not mentioned by gun control zealots or by the liberal media, he says. So, I mean, I don't know if we're getting any closer to any answers here. Another dogma on gun control supporters is that having a gun in the home is for self-defense is futile and is only likely to increase the chances of getting hurt or killed. Your best bet is to offer no resistance to an intruder, according to this dogma. But actual research tells the opposite story. People who have not resisted have gotten hurt twice as often as people who resisted with a firearm. Those who resisted without a firearm got hurt the most often. Most use of guns in self-defense, whether in the home or elsewhere, do not involve actually pulling the trigger. When the intended victim turns out to have a gun in his hand, the attacker usually has enough brains to back off. But the lives saved this way do not get counted. People killed at home by family members are highly atypical. The great majority of these victims have had to call the police to their homes before because of domestic violence. Just over half had the cops out several times. These are not just ordinary people who happen to lose their temper with a gun in their hand. Neither are most children who are killed by guns just toddlers who happen to find a loaded weapon lying around. Most of those children are members of teenage criminal gangs who kill each other deliberately, and that's the last thing he has to say. So it seems like he's pointing to other issues. Crock, how did you respond to that narrative that he's weaving there?
I didn't really see a narrative. I just saw, he marshals the statistics in a manner that contradicts the way other people marshal their statistics. So, I feel like either way, there's no complete narrative being offered. There's no underlying cause. It's hard to say.
And again, you can always give other reasons. I mean, there is a drop in gun violence in the last 25 years. Part of this is you say, okay, there was a crack epidemic, which now is less. So that's part of it. And a lot of Clinton, put a lot of black people in jail. So you have less gun crime in the black community. All of that, and some people say it's because of abortions.
Yeah, that was in the freaking, and that's obviously true. And another hidden fact in the crime rates going down in places like New York is just is gentrification. You replace old poor neighborhoods with trendy cafes and nightclubs and things, and the house prices go up and they're pushed out to elsewhere, to places like Baltimore. So at the same time as New York City's murder rate goes down, you'll get spikes in crime elsewhere, because that's basically where the people are being pushed to. So you're basically moving the problem somewhere else with the gentrification. Another thing that happens. I'm looking at some. There's a site called justfacts.com, which has a whole bunch of stats that I'm looking at right now. And it says in 2015, when Baltimore, Maryland experienced the highest per capita murder rate in its history, 77% of homicide suspects identified by the police had prior criminal records. The average homicide suspect had been previously arrested more than 9 times. So, I mean, one of the things that you're looking at really seems to be pointing at gang culture in inner cities, which is, your typical. I'm building up a picture of a typical homicide suspect here, and it's not a crazy redneck sitting in Oklahoma. It's somebody in Baltimore who probably belongs to a gang. Am I wrong here?
Oh, I mean, black crime is. I think homicide. I think about 50% of homicide in America is done by black people, which is. I mean, those are the numbers that I hear being put out, by the likes of Atheism and Unstoppable and others in the skeptic community, which are going against the narrative that the police is racist towards blacks. And I say no. Some blacks just commit a lot more crime, and I have to say a lot of I agree that a lot of it probably because they don't have fathers. This is something that I was shocked by when I heard. This is actually, I didn't know about this. I saw it first on the Dave Rubin. Someone said it, maybe Larry Elder or someone. When I heard that 75% or something like that of black children today grow in one-parent family, that immediately made me change my view of I said, if that's the case, it means that something needs to be changed in the welfare, in the policies.
Do you want to hear what the SJW response to this is? You're going to love it.
Yeah, what is it?
They say that the American nuclear family is a white supremacist construct because it doesn't take into account alternative family arrangements. So they say that there are tribes in Africa where the entire village is raising the children, and so this is
and as if the entire village is raising black children in America. I mean Black Lives Matter.
They get a lot of that stuff from Engels, just FYI.
Yeah, Black Lives Matter adopted this in one of their manifestos. We demand the changing of the idea that the nuclear family is the best way or something like that. We demand the recognition of alternative types of families. So they instead of trying to solve the problem, they defend this whole.
Crock, I don't know if you can share that with anybody who's watching, that link that I've just given you in the chat, but if you just type in just facts gun control or just the facts, it will bring up this page, and it's actually really interesting bunch of graphs and murder rates, and you can actually just see that there's no taking sides on this site, so it's kind of refreshing to see just the cold statistics here. I'm looking at one now where they brought in the gun control laws in England and Wales. There was one in 1968 and one in 1997, and in both cases the homicide rate just carried on increasing. So it's not like, I guess that's not very convenient to the narrative. I do not have a view on this, by the way. I mean, if you'd asked me 5 years ago, I would probably just said, yeah, it's probably a good idea not to have guns. Um, but looking at the cold figures, it doesn't seem to make a difference. It seems to be people will find ways to kill each other no matter what. So it seems to be a cultural thing rather than a do you have a gun thing. Do you have any views on this, Crock? I mean, are you someone who's really keen on the Second Amendment, or what's your
I'm not really sure about my position on this one. On this one, I'm undecided. You know, I've thought of extreme fixes in one direction or the other, either give everybody guns or take away all semi-automatic weapons. But you know, I don't really commit to a particular position.
I don't see why people need to own semi-automatic weapons. This is I don't understand how you let people own. Why do they need them?
I'm looking at this now. They banned handguns in Chicago
Yeah,
in 1983.
Sorry, I just want to answer his question.
Yeah.
The answer I get is in case the government becomes tyrannical, the civilians need a means of defending themselves.
When the government becomes tyrannical, it's because half of the civilians will support the tyrannical government, and with guns. So this is this idea that the government, a tyrannical government, rises in opposition to the civilians. It's just false. The tyrannical government rises when the culture of the country, when you have large support for it among the people. So the people just start shooting each other. So I don't see that as a as a reason, as an excuse.
I have to say that the one of the graphs that I'm looking at, these graphs now, that they banned handguns in Chicago in 1983 by the look of things. Crime rate just continued, the murder rate just shot up, and didn't seem to abate. And then it sort of fell after 1998, which is kind of in line with a lot of cities in America. After the mid 90s, which is when that generation would have been born, with the abortions starts to kick in. But also they started to crack down a lot harder during that period. The other graph that really stood out to me here was the Florida right to carry law. In 1987, Florida's right to carry law became effective. The law requires that concealed carry licenses be 21 years of age or older, have a clean criminal mental health records, and complete a firearms safety training course. Basically, so everyone who has a gun there has to do it legally with a license. And they brought that in 87, and basically the murder rate goes through the floor. So that seems to be the most effective.
The safety course is what I was talking about before. It's a good idea. Yeah.
Very similar effects in Texas with the right to carry law, and similar effects in Michigan with the So it seems like the right to carry has got the best looking graphs that I can see, to the point where I'm wondering if just the facts are right to carry lobbyists, because these graphs are looking very good for the right to carry people.
Michigan is a bit the rate went down before the right to carry law. But
and in Texas it was on a very sharp trend. Very sharp trend beforehand. So you can tell what story you want, I guess.
That's the thing. That's the thing. With all these, you can tell what story you want. Like I said before, there's a lot of variables. But I mean, when I look at America, it appears to me that people are just trigger happy. A lot of people, and this is something that needs to change. And this is something, this culture is changing. It can only change very slowly.
Are you saying this the notorious B.I.G.'s fault in some way? Or
he's a product. He's a product. Yeah, he's. I mean, it's the Wild West fault, basically. Yeah. So, It goes back to the days of the Wild West.
Yeah, no, and speaking of Sowell, he's got this book called I don't know if any of you guys have read it. It's called Black Red, or is it White Liberals and Black Rednecks and White Liberals, where his basic argument is that black people in America adopted the redneck culture and mindset, and that this is actually part and part. You know, you're talking about the Wild West, part and parcel of why there are these endemic problems is cultural. It's because that whole culture is, you know, it has the values of a redneck essentially. So
I mean, you can trace it. You say, okay, so there were gunmen of the Wild West. Then you know there were the gangsters, and in the early 20th century were mainly Italians and Irish and Jews, and then it was adopted by blacks, and so this culture of this gangster was then adopted by blacks and by Mexicans, and so you can trace it, and so yeah, there is something to that. I mean, the whole gangster as a hero thing goes back to the 1920s,
but
and there's that.
Even with because obviously I as an aficionado of the gangster movies, as I'm sure other people are, one of the reoccurring tropes in them though is that they always talk about the difference between working with like the old school mafia versus working with blacks in gangs, and the reoccurring trope is that the blacks have a habit of killing each other, and not sticking by the codes of the mafia and so on. So there even seems to be even within the strange ranks of gangsters, there seems to be like different classes of gangsters almost.
In The Godfather, they always said, working with the niggers and the spics, it's something that is not done because they're not they can't be trusted. They can't.
They don't.
Or even they're not people.
Yeah. They don't honor the code.
They're animals.
This is also a line I think in. They have a conversation about it in Reservoir Dogs. I seem to remember, which is Tarantino aping that whole trope from the earlier generation. Okay. Well, I don't know if we're going to get anywhere. All
right.
Should we wrap this up, Crock?
It was an interesting talk. Do we have any final thoughts we want to share?
Well, I guess we could ask anyone in the live chat if they are you pro gun control, or are you pro just write like gun control or Second Amendment, and we'll leave it there.
Yeah, leave it in the comments, and discuss it with each other. Contact us. Our Twitter information will be in the description box. All right, are we good to go then?
Yeah.
All right then. Well, thank you for tuning in, everybody. This has, as always, been just a bunch of complete crock. Thanks.